Welcome back everybody, I am Carter Sandvin, and this is the channel for Sandbox Illustration. I am currently at home, quite sick. My throat feels awful, so I thought, hey, it's best time to do a talking video. Today, I am going to be explaining to you guys everything that has been going on with all of the stories that I'm currently working on, and as you can tell by the title, I am giving the final verdict on what is going on with Jackals. You guys may have already thought that we reached the final verdict on Jackals, but me, being the good old nostalgic boy that I am, didn't really want that to be. But where we are sitting right now, I have officially come to the conclusion that Jackals is no more. Jackals never will be. Jackals is officially a dead project in the water, which is a good thing. I don't want anyone to think that I'm sad about this. I mean, part of me is kind of sad because Jackals has a very special place in my heart. But no, I am definitely happy with the decision to officially drop Jackals. So today I'm going to be explaining to you everything relating to Jackals and then what has led up to the point that we are at today. And then after that, I'm going to be explaining to you what's going to be going on with every other story and how that connects back to Jackals. I know that this is all a whole thing, but I'm excited to talk about it, and I hope that you guys are excited to listen. Just so you know, I am going to be taking breaks to drink some tea. Before we get started with everything, I do want to clear up the air on my uploading schedule. I did skip a week for uploads, and that is because the day that I'm recording this is the day after I would have uploaded this video. And that's just because this last week I started to get sick, and I was very fatigued and demotivated for the whole week. I just couldn't find the energy to actually record this video. I just needed some time to relax and not over push my body. So this is going to be a week late, but just to let you guys know, the reason why I didn't upload this last week was because I was sick. So here we are now, still sick, and we're going to keep making videos. So officially getting into it, the Death of Jackals. I think I'm actually going to start this video off. I didn't plan on this originally in my notes, but I think I'm actually going to start this off giving my recap of the story of Jackals, at least the latest inception of Jackals. Now, there are going to be some issues with it, and that's all going to be explained later on when we get into why I'm no longer doing Jackals. So Jackals is a superhero story, but it is a retelling of Earth. It was more of an alternate history. And the whole concept behind it is Earth is how it's always been, except for the fact that half of the planet has superpowers. It doesn't matter how benign or how extreme the capability is, roughly half of the population of the entire planet has some sort of metaphysical ability to them. This was all cleared through and discovered in roughly the 1930s to 40s, when scientists discovered the beryllium cell. They don't know where this cell came from, they don't know what gives it its properties, but what they do know is, if you have this cell in your blood, you have the chance of gaining a superpower. The way that it works is your blood will be a certain percentage of the beryllium cell nicknamed spores. And however much of your blood's percentage is the beryllium cell, that is your spore count. So if 12% of my blood was the beryllium cell or the spore, I would have a spore count of 12. Now this cell has some mysterious properties to it to where when it manifests through the rest of your body enough, it will transform your entire being and give you some kind of capability. But this can only happen if you have a spore count of 35 or higher. And in this world, we see a lot of things that are clearly debunked by the beryllium cell existing. Many cases in the past of miracles going on or godlike beings. In fact, I thought that was going to be kind of a cool detail in the story called Gods Debunked, where it shows that all of the mythologies and all of our current monotheistic religions actually did exist, but it's because a person with powers existed along the people around them. So like Zeus or Thor or even Jesus, these were all just people that had spore counts. They were all people that had gifts to them. And a majority of the people around them did not, so they were looked at as higher beings. They were looked at as gods. And one nice detail about this story is that, in my personal opinion, I think that me and Adam put in the work to really explain how something like spores could really go through and affect not only history, but the current status of the world today. So for instance, we don't really have police anymore in this world, and we don't really have militaries. What we have is two different initiatives. There is the Defender Initiative, and there's the Guardian Initiative. The Defender Initiative is where if you decide to work for the city, be paid on essentially a government wage, you act as the police. You use your capabilities to act as the police. So if you had super strength, or if you had super speed, mind reading, yada yada, you could use this and go sign up for the Defender program, and you would essentially be there to fight crime. So instead of having the more stereotypical vigilant stories that we get with most modern superheroes, you would literally act as defenders of the city that were hired that way. And then the Guardian Initiative is what replaces the military. So what they do is they find people that have a high enough spore count. Now, if your spore count is higher, your powers are much stronger. Your powers will be a lot weaker if they're just at the 35 to like 45 range, but some people will have spore counts of 80 to 100 sometimes. Some people will have nothing but beryllium in their blood. Some people nickname them green bloods. And for the Guardian Initiative, those people will be taken and trained to act essentially as a one-man military. Every country in the world will have their own guardian, and instead of having multiple men go out and fight in wars, these two men will battle, and whoever wins is essentially who wins the war. Because they had seen in the past that when you had multiple men that would come through with a bunch of superpowers, all it would result in is just utter destruction and chaos. When you have hundreds of powers being used at once, the only thing that is truly hurt by it is the environment around you. In fact, in this world, there was a continent, a chunk of Russia literally split off and became its own continent because it had been so destroyed by warfare. I'm looking at the fake camera on my camcorder. I should be looking right there. Hello. So through our main characters, you see multiple different origin stories that relate to these people getting powers. Some people have their powers, but they hate them. Some people have powers, but they hide them. Some people are trying to gain powers, and some people become Rudies. Now, a Rudie is someone who doesn't have a spore count, but they take on a gift in some way. The origin of the name Rudy is a man in the past named, I believe it was Rudy Lafferty was his name. He did not have a spore count, but he wanted to control fire. So he experimented with fire one day, giving himself third-degree burns. And unfortunately, he kind of became a laughingstock among both gifted individuals and regular human beings. Where this is interesting is that in this world, because it's sort of half and half, people with powers and people without them, you get much civil conflict between the two large groups, where regular humans see them as just lazy and taking their powers for granted and essentially trying to act as gods and trying to solve every single problem that is imaginable. Where people with gifts look at regular humans as prejudiced, and they see them as nothing but jealous and petty, and they are just upset that they have to go through their normal trials in life while they don't necessarily have to. And both of these groups kind of look at Rudy's with a shunful eye, because one side sees it as a mockery to regular humans, that you wouldn't even want to be like us, that you would want to be like these more godlike beings, and the other side kind of sees it the same way. They see them as posers, they see them as fakes, people that are just trying to get some kind of glory out of life when they clearly don't have anything to warrant it. I understand that both of these groups kind of sound like a-holes, but again, I'll get to all the problems that I have with the story later on. But anyway, the actual plot of this story starts with a young girl named Heidi Hathaway, who was sort of an adopted child by one of the mentors in the world, Catilla. She is the mentor of health. If you guys don't know, in this world, there are, I believe, 11 different pillars of powers, and each one has a mentor. Now, the mentor was not granted this, they were sort of just born with it. They sort of took on the role, not by choice, because what really does make someone a mentor is the most powerful being in the world within their category becomes a mentor. So you don't really choose it, but you get like the strongest man alive, the smartest man alive, you get the woman with unlimited healing capabilities. All these people take up these ranks and become the mentors of body, of mind, of beast, of health, of illusion. And we meet Catilla, who is the mentor of health. And she has taken on many children in the past. She has adopted multiple beings from different realms. Now, realms in this world, there's really only two. There's Earth, and then there is Ru. Ru is a distant planet that the mentor of spirit inhabited to give souls on Earth a place to live after death. A young girl named Solia Burton in England would always walk around with very bad vision. She would walk around and always see just a constant fog wherever she would go. But then she started to notice that it was like, my vision isn't bad. It's just like a fog, like it's always foggy out. But then other people would say, it's not foggy, there's nothing here, it's clear as day. And she soon learned what she was seeing were people's spirits. And so she decided to use her powers to try and give them a home so that they wouldn't have to be stuck constantly flooding Earth as it is. Because all the souls that she would see was every single person in history that passed away. So she found this planet named Ru and gave all souls in this world their own home. Now, what came with this was some of the souls would inhabit the alien race that lived there, called the Drala, translates to us as dwellers. I was about to say Dwemer, that's a dwarf. No, dwellers. These are sort of demons. Now, when the souls are sent to this planet, sometimes they will just be a floating spirit, other times they will take the body of the aliens that live there. And that is actually what happened to Catilla. She reincarnated as a dweller, and she now lives as a dweller mentor. And there are a few that are that way. And they all possess Ru. That would be the mentor of illusion, and the mentor of weapons, I believe. However, those two aren't necessarily important to the story. But now we'll just get back to the standard plot. So she would go through and adopt many children in her goings. You know, she had a very maternal nature to her, and so she would find many young people who looked kind of lost, and she would take them in and provide them shelter, health, guidance, and one of these was Treverin, and another one was actually Heidi. What happens too when you're a dweller is that unless you are killed, you live forever. Dwellers don't die. Because of the bodies that they take on, since they were essentially empty vessels, they don't act the same way as our bodies do. They don't rot. They just take that form, and that's how they go on. That's just a little detail that I thought would clear up some stuff, and it especially clears up some stuff with Treverin. Anyway, Catilla, as she goes through her endeavors, eventually gains a romantic connection with the Mentor of Beasts, and along the way, she actually trusts the Mentor of Beasts with her prized possession, the Heart of Catilla. The Heart of Catilla is this enchanted gem that essentially beholds all of her power. When she doesn't have it on her, her powers are a bit weaker. And that's because she decided to take some time away from being ruler of the world, or at least one of them, and she just decided to live with her children until one of her children got sick. And this is the inciting incident that sets off our whole story. One of her children, named Genwick, becomes very ill, and so she's trying to look for the Heart of Catilla. Now, one thing to keep in mind with dwellers is that dwellers naturally have an irrational rage to them. Something about the brain chemistry in their bodies mixed with a human soul causes them to be very irate, very short-tempered, very irrational as well. And so in her quest to try and get back to Earth and find the Heart of Catilla, she has ironically caused many deaths. She has caused destruction in a lot of places in order to get this heart. And our main character, Heidi Hathaway, notices this. Heidi starts to get the feeling that once Catilla gets all of her power back, that she might not go back to being as pacifist as she used to be. So she takes the initiative and steals the Heart of Catilla. And so this first chapter of the story, you would see that Catilla is hunting down Hyra. Not Hyra, Heidi. Hyra is the main character for Ephialtum. And again, we'll talk about Ephialtum. This is going to be a huge video, and so many things are going to be going on. Another thing too, I will leave chapters in the timeline. If you want to like skip past this part, if you want to go to a separate part, go ahead. Those will all be in the description. So the first chapter of Jackals is all about Heidi trying to run from Catilla, because she knows that pure destruction could happen if she got her heart back. So she makes a little team of all of our main characters, and she does whatever she can to take down Catilla. She realizes that, unfortunately, the best initiative right now might be to just not have her as mentor anymore. Try and remove her capabilities at some level. Now, this is very difficult since she is no longer human, since she no longer runs on blood like we do. So, unfortunately, they might have to resort to killing her. Now, this does not go well for her other children, one of them being Treverin. And so this first chapter, you would see different members of our main group come together and take on this battle with Heidi, until eventually, one day in a large battle, Jenwick dies. She is killed by Samuel Sanders, who is the brother to Tara and Charlie Sanders. These were going to be the characters of me, my sister, and my brother. Their story is they had a family that had not had a high spore count or any gifts whatsoever for generations. I believe 7 generations. They had just been normal humans. And so they raised their children to accommodate that, you know? They trained them on how to handle their health, you know, when it comes to like hospital visits and exercise and things like that, on self-defense, on different financial things. They just tried to raise them as normal people in a world full of superheroes. Until one day, Tara Sanders, when she's a young child, discovers that she has telekinesis and telepathy. Now, this is something that claws at her deeply, because she truly feels like a monster. She feels like a freak of nature. And this causes some serious strife for the family, because both of the parents are just scared, because they've never learned how to handle somebody with powers, let alone how to raise one. And you get an interesting dynamic between all the children. You get Samuel, who's the youngest, and he's very optimistic, but he's also very chaotic and very reckless sometimes. Samuel is purely interested in what she can do with her powers, if she's ever going to become a defender or maybe even a guardian. Like, if she would ever take on an alias, what would that be like? And then you get Charlie, who tries to settle all the conflict between the family, where you get one person that's very excited, one person that's disgusted, and then 2 people that are terrified. And he's just trying to be in the middle, making sure that everyone else is happy. You know, doing his best to make sure that not everybody is let down. And you would see throughout the beginning of the story, you would see them grow up as children into adults. And you would see that Charlie, unfortunately, had to reveal to everybody that Tara had powers. Sorry if I didn't say Tara at some point. These old names are completely out of my head at this point, and so it's a mess. What comes through this family conflict is eventually Sam realizes that he wants powers. He wants to have a gift of his own, but he doesn't have a spore count. The only one that does is Tara. He keeps trying to figure out like what he can do, what he might like to do, and his parents absolutely refuse to let that happen. You know, they can't do anything about Tara having a gift, but to let their son become a Rudy, ridiculous to them. And they're like, absolutely not. And this inner familial fighting gets so intense to the point where Samuel runs away from home. He's never heard from again, at least for another few years. He feels as if his parents betrayed him. He feels as if something that he's really excited to do with his life is being bashed and frowned upon. And all he wants is support. And he's not getting that from his family, clearly. For a long time, the family is just Charlie, Tara, and their parents. Tara had gone a long time with not doing anything with her powers. She never used them, never touched them. Unfortunately, the problem with that is if you don't do anything to train with your powers, they can act quite chaotically depending on what the powers are. If you don't learn how to control them, they can go completely haywire on you, you know? Think of it something like, it sort of acts like an illness, you know? If you don't go and actively get it treated, if you just ignore it, all it's going to do is just manifest and completely take over everything in your system. And that's what happened with her. In fact, her character gets a lot of social anxiety and developed agoraphobia even, because when she's in a crowd, not only can she hear everyone talking, she can hear all their thoughts on top of that. And the sound and the sensory overload would just break her. Tara is one of the people that is actually approached by Heidi. The way that this happened was Charlie met Heidi and instantly gained sort of a crush on her, but he doesn't have a power. So he's like, I would love to help you, but I don't have any abilities. And she's like, do you know anybody that does? And he's like, I do, but it's kind of a stretch. So Charlie and Heidi decide to go and meet up with Tara and ask her, look, I understand how you feel about your gift, but we have something going on that could potentially save the world. And we think that you could help out a lot. And she actually decides, you know what? Maybe this is just the time where I stop avoiding this thing, where I stop treating this as if it's an illness and treat it as if it's just a trait of mine. And so she goes to her parents and she sits them down and says, guys, I have decided to step up to the plate and use my gift. And by the way, this is the first time that she's ever called it a gift, so that even kind of catches them off guard. I decided to use my gift to help out a group that are potentially going to save everybody. And they're very nervous about this, not only about her using her powers, but also with her not being trained. They don't want her to have any part of it. And now the script has sort of flipped for her, because now she feels like a monster all over again. Not only did she feel like a monster before with just having her power, but now she's decided to use it for something good. And her parents just give her that same look. The same look that they gave her when she first discovered her powers. So she storms out. Now her father doesn't know what to do, and he just goes onto the back deck and starts smoking. He started smoking because of just all the stress going on with his children, with Tara having her powers, with Samuel running away. It's an ugly habit, but he needed something to try and calm him down. So he'd been smoking for quite a long time at this point, ever since Samuel essentially ran away, until he's standing out on the back deck, looking at his pack, and he just storms off. And so you see Tara driving down the street, and where Tara eventually gets hit by this massive body. And what is this body? This is Drock, one of Katilla's children, a freaking unit of strength and mass and durability. He is a tank, and he just completely crashes into her car. Doesn't nearly kill her, but she's pretty injured. And she sees that she's been ambushed by Drock and by Treverin, because Treverin is a shapeshifter, and he uses this capability to sort of sneak around and try and figure out what's going on behind the scenes. And he tries to sneak his way into different areas and gain information, and always tries to be one step ahead. With that, Treverin finds out that Tara is part of this operation to take down Katilla. So, obviously you gotta take her out. But guess who drives up to save her? Her father, with his prized shotgun, starts just blasting holes into Drock, hits him with his truck multiple times, and eventually just shoves him down a hillside. Because of this, Treverin has a vendetta out for David, Tara's father. And he decides that as long as his kids are doing what they love, he has no problem with them being defenders. So he decides to give a call to Sam. And as he gives a call to Sam saying, hey buddy, I just wanted to let you know that I know that we had a falling out, but I support you in whatever you're gonna do. And he's like, thanks, Dad. And he's like, I love you. He's like, I love you too. Hangs up the phone, starts aggressively coughing. And then he ends up going to the hospital, learning that he has lung cancer. Now, this is the incident that makes Sam going from being a villain to becoming a hero. Because Sam was actually part of Treverin's little squad to try and take down Heidi and the main group. Okay, that massive tangent should be out of the way. But eventually what you see is the final battle, and what they learn is their father did not die from lung cancer because of his smoking, because Katilla gave it to him for killing his son. And that's how he died. And Treverin made sure that it was a slow and painful death. And because of that, Samuel killed Jenwick. And what happened when he killed Jenwick? You see Katilla just get on her knees and scream. And as she screams, she sends out a surge of power, sort of akin to Scarlet Witch when she sees Quicksilver die in Avengers Age of Ultron. As she screams, a huge wave of magic just pulses out away from her body. And what was that magic that Catilla sent out? Exactly what Heidi was predicting. Catilla caused the zombie apocalypse. And so you see our main group trying to fight their way through the apocalypse. And they are trying to find some way to bring the world back. And unfortunately, this would result in them officially killing Catilla. But they realize you would need a mentor to replace Catilla. So they find a young little girl who has an interesting power. It's quite strange for other health ones. She can't directly heal somebody, but she has a telepathic and an empathetic connection with microlife and viruses. And so they decide that the best route would be to give her the heart of Catilla so that she can get rid of whatever this virus is and bring back the world. So this whole fight happens. Catilla eventually dies, Treverin being alive to witness the whole thing, and you would then see the world be brought back. Now what happens? Our main group are looked at as superheroes. They all have names now. They have aliases. You have Heidi Hathaway. You have Charlie and Tara Sanders. You have Atticus Padmore. You have other characters that I can't remember. And so the next chapter of this story, there is like a 15-year time jump. And one of the previous characters actually had a child. And you would see this child grow up and gain an ability. Now, he goes on this whole journey to try and discover what his power is. Because they can detect that he has a power. They just don't know what category it's from. So in order for him to get the proper training, they need to know what this power is. So you see him go to different places and find this power. And what does he find? He finds his father as a dweller. His father passed away in the previous battle with Catilla. And because of how dwellers act, he eventually sees that his father has now become an evil person. There's a lot more lore to it that's behind it with like the relationships of each character. But I unfortunately can't get into that right now. But essentially the way that this character, his name is Axel, the child, is the way that he discovers his power is by fighting his father. Unfortunately, he has to put him down. And along the way, they soon learn that Treverin is alive. And Treverin is set on a vendetta to kill the Jackals. If you guys don't know, the Jackals is like the name of the main group. You know, that's the name that they take on. It's like the Justice League, it's like the Avengers, they're called the Jackals. So the next chapter of the story is all about them being essentially the victim of Treverin's reign, where you see that they all eventually team up and take him down, and so he needs to find some new way to take on the Jackals. This would be the final chapter of Jackals. Now in this chapter, as Treverin is setting out to find some unique way that he could truly take on this group, along the way he discovers a way that he could not only take down the Jackals, but evolve man into something much more powerful than they currently are. Because remember, Treverin's whole motivation is to essentially be the most powerful man alive. And if he could be the guy that saves humanity from essentially itself, then he'll be a king. He'll be a god. And that's all that he wants, really. And what is this? This is sort of a tie-in from a previous story, but it's kind of an odd concept just on its own. And I'll get into that later on, but he essentially makes vampires. What he does is he goes to a man by the name of Matthias. Now Matthias has a health power where he can grant different substances and different like food or drink items with a healing property or a killing property, just like anything that will like affect your health. And so he acts as like a witch doctor. He takes different items and he enchants them. But the problem is, once you enchant a certain item with a certain capability, it's stuck with that. You can't enchant an apple to like cure a cold and cure cancer. You know what I mean? So an apple does one thing, a pear does one thing, and so you see him get very creative with the different things that people would eat. Like they would eat goat hair, they would eat frog eyes, they would eat cow uterus. And so Treverin approaches Matthias saying, I need you to enchant something for me that could take the human form and essentially give it a superior defense. So like people would start growing like an exoskeleton, and they would be able to jump super high, and they would have superior strength. They would be able to run faster. Their reflexes would be faster. Matthias says, I would love to, but I have bad news. And he's like, what is it? He's like, I don't have anything else. He's like, what? He's like, yeah. Trust me, there are enough ailments in this world. Out of my entire collection, I've completely run out of things to enchant, other than one thing. And he's like, what is it? And he's like, the only thing that I haven't used is human flesh or blood. And Trevarron, just kind of being the way that Trevarron was, he was like, oh, why not do it? And he's like, are you kidding me? And he's like, just trust me on this. We'll try it. Take some of your own blood and enchant it. He's like, fine. So they find a test subject, they make him drink Matthias's blood, and they see him become this, like, meta-human. He is far superior to anything that a human could ever be. And this is Matthias's, like, wake-up call. This is his call to action. He realizes, like, if people become this, they won't have to be cured for anything ever again. And so he joins Trevarron in his endeavor. Granted, they have different motivations for it. Matthias just wants to save the planet, where Trevarron just wants to be the guy that saves humanity, you know. So you see a final battle between all of our main heroes and Trevarron. Now, again, there's a bunch of stuff with character arcs and minor details that go on with it, but what you eventually see is that Axel, the one person with the highest vendetta to kill Trevarron, he's the one that gives him the final landing blow. Drives a rod, or not a rod, like a blade, like a spear, straight through his chest. And this is where you see Trevarron actually just kind of calm down, because he starts to realize, you know what, maybe my immortality and my unstoppable nature was kind of my downfall. Again, remember that dwellers are essentially immortal. So Axel asks him, he's like, I got a question for you. How old are you? And he's like, 450 years old. Not only have I lived my own life, but I have seen almost every single event in human history that has come to this point today. And he's like, and you know what, I think that's enough. Then you see him die. And then you see all of our main characters go off and live their lives as they wish. And that's Jackals. That's the plot of Jackals, and the world building of Jackals, and some of the important characters of Jackals. Now, the next part that we're going to get into, it's just going to be a quick recap, because I've talked about it in a previous video, but it's essentially my whole development process of my animation project, and of Jackals, and getting us to the point that we're actually at today. So we really will try to make this the summed up, quick time version, okay? So, back in 2019, I set myself out on a drawing project where I wanted to make superheroes out of all the people that I knew. But I didn't want to just give people powers that they wanted. I actually wanted to give people powers that were based off of their personality. So I gave myself a wand that draws stuff, and then I gave Haley, I gave her communication with animals. And then I gave Adam tech powers, and I gave Spencer armored skin and bones, sort of akin to like something that a daredevil would use for like stunts and things like that. As you heard in there, my sister had telekinesis and telepathy. That's how I wanted to do that. And as I was creating the characters that was supposed to be just for a drawing project, they all started to develop their own backstories and their own characters, and I was like, I have to do something with this. But then I thought to myself, you know what? A comic wouldn't do this justice. Some of the action scenes that I see in my head are so cool that I have to animate this. I have to. I'm going to make this an animation. And that was the first ever project that it was going to be. And I got so far in it, or not so far, I got pretty far into it, until I watched God of War. I am going to say watched, because my first experience with God of War 2018 was watching the cutscenes. I played the game myself, but just later on. And so with that, I was like,
you know what? I don't like superheroes anymore. I like fantasy. Let's go fantasy.
And then I was making all the fantasy stuff, and then I got really bored of that. And I was like,
you know what? So many things are fantasy. I don't think I want fantasy. I'm gonna go sci-fi.
Or no, it wasn't sci-fi, it was steampunk. So then I went for steampunk, and I was like,
Steampunk isn't very original. So many things are steampunk. I'm gonna go sci-fi instead, like cyberpunk.
Then I went cyberpunk. But that version of it was so bad that when we were developing it, we were like, this sucks. Like, the other ones were fine stories. I was just indecisive, and I wanted to, like, make everything at once, essentially. The fantasy story had a great structure, the superhero story had a great structure, and so did the steampunk one. So then I went to sci-fi, and I genuinely was like, this is awful. We can't do this. So then we were trying to figure out, like, what to do with the project, and I just decided, you know what? Jackals was near perfect. Now, the reason that I said that was, it had some of its moments that I didn't like. There were some things with plot that I wasn't a fan of. But I was like, the characters in that were so solid, and they truly were. One of the standout things in Jackals was a cast of characters that had such good motivations to them and such good arcs that they really carried the story. Like, those are some of my favorite characters that I've ever developed in a story. So I was like, you know what? Let's just go back to Jackals, and we will truly commit this time. So this was about the beginning of 2021. About 2 years had passed through this whole endeavor. And as we were developing that story, my knowledge for writing was getting better and better. Wasn't great at the time, but it was getting better. And I soon started to learn that I developed Jackals not as a story. It was just a myriad of events that followed one after the other. And I tried so hard to tie in all of it at the end that a bunch of it didn't need to be there, but I also didn't want to let go of anything. And this was the biggest issue that I had with it, was because the story was already developed, I essentially tried to reverse engineer the story, and it went horribly. What I mean by that is, I had my story, but at the time, I didn't think of it like I do today, where you find your theme, then you find symbols for that, then you find the characters, then you find out what the characters are going to do, then you have your plot, and then you go from there, you know? Like, it's a sort of tree that you build outward. I had started here, though, and I tried to go back. And that was the problem, because the theme that we had was extremely lame. Even for a superhero story, it was bad. It was essentially humanity's good. If I had to break it down to its simplest thing, was humanity's good. And I didn't like that. And one of the biggest reasons that I didn't like that was the fact that that was so corny. The villain was really corny. Treverin sucked. He was not a good villain. Treverin just had a cookie cutter motivation of just trying to be a god or a superhero or being the most powerful man alive because power, I guess. He wasn't developed like I wanted him to be. And so we tried to get rid of Treverin. But here's the problem. The story at that point not only was so developed, but the characters were so developed that they all beautifully were woven together into this story. And one of those threads was Treverin. With a majority of our characters, we couldn't have kept them the way that we did originally if we got rid of Treverin. And we realized this is unfixable. Jackals was the unfixable story. I was reading it right there to see, like, where I'm at, because I have it in my notes describing the unfixable story, but Jackals truly was. It was the unfixable story, because we had a villain that was really lame, but he was so integral to the story that you couldn't do the story without him. So we had to bite the bullet. Jackals was dead. Not because of aesthetics, not because of personal preference, but because it just wouldn't work. At least, it wouldn't be the story that we wanted it to be. When I say we, again, it's me and Adam, because Adam has been on this project with me the entire way. He actually started helping me. He wasn't really there for Jackals at the beginning, but then I started to ask him details about fantasy, because he loves Dungeons and Dragons, so he knows so many things about fantasy worlds and about world building that I wanted his advice on how to develop a fantasy world. And with that, he just kind of stuck to the project. And I'm so glad for it. And he helped me along the way, the entire way, for every reincarnation of this story up until today. I shouldn't say until. He's still here. He's not gone. Until implies that, like, now he's left. No, he's still here. He's still my co-creator. We are co-creators. I'm going to say it that way. This ain't my project. It's our project. We are co-creators on this. He's not my co-creator. He's my partner. We are co-creators. Let's go. Brotherhood.
A friend is a friend to the end of the end. That's forever and a day.
So we scrapped Jackals. Jackals was officially dead, and we did label it the Unfixable Story. So we tried different things. We tried different story dynamics. We tried different worlds, and we came up with a few until we eventually did land on FE Ultim. And I talked a little bit about FE Ultim in my previous video called Discussing My Stories. Oh, no, my animation project, and Discussing Stories. But those two have the perfect amount of information on the story. I don't want to talk about it too much because so many details in the story currently are really like dependent on reveals and twists. And so with that, I don't really want to talk about FE Ultim until later down the line. I am going to make videos on it, but for now, FE Ultim is just our story, and you'll see it when it comes out. Now, moving on from all of this, this would be about last month actually, and Adam and I have been working on FE Ultim for about a year, I believe. Yeah, we started in roughly the end of 2021, so it's been a little over a year that we've been working on this project. And there was always that thought in my head of like, man, I kind of miss Jackals. More so, I just miss the characters. The characters I was a huge fan of, but I was like, but there's nothing that we can do about it. I mean, like, what would we do? And me being me with my stories, like they're my babies, and I don't know how to kill my. Now I know how to kill my babies, but back then I didn't. I didn't know how to kill my babies at all. So I was still kind of thinking about Jackals right in the back of my head. Never to act on it, but I was just thinking about it. That was a mistake. Because I thought about it way too much. And now, to pat myself a little on the back, I'd say I've gotten quite a bit better at writing. And I kind of fixed the Unfixable Story. I figured out a much better way to do Jackals and essentially keep it the same way that we did. What I came up with was, so the biggest thing that we were having throughout the story is that you see, it was all about humanity, right? The villain essentially wanted to make humanity much better than it was, and the heroes appreciated the simplicity and the vulnerability of being a human, and they didn't want us to lose that through the pursuit of powers. Now that's fine, it's not original. And so like all of the main characters, this is getting much more into like why these characters I thought were like near perfect. So many characters reflected this in some way, you know? One person became a Rudy and was very ashamed of it. One person became a Rudy and became a villain because of their scrutiny. One person hid the fact that they were a Rudy from everybody. One person hated their powers. One person didn't trust other people with powers. One person had their powers, but they didn't know how to use them to actually be a proper defender. There was even an alien character who was just trying to figure out like what it meant to be human. Because this alien race, they were like a glowing orb that they scan living things and then they can completely replicate them. So for instance, if this glowing orb, like, okay, so like the orb is like right here, right? And it's like staring at me in the face. I will fix my lighting. But that thing is like staring at me in the face. And what it does is it essentially acts as like a copy machine or like a printer. And it will take in the most basic details of me and then slowly go inward and get more details about my overall structure. And this will even get to the point that the alien can replicate my voice and even have my memories and my thoughts. So it first starts out, it will just take my overall shape, and then it'll take my color palette, and then it'll take my insides, like my organs and stuff. Then it'll scan my skeleton. Then it'll scan my brain, and then it'll scan every single thought that I've had, every single memory that I have. That alien, if it stood there long enough and just like held me in place, doing this, essentially just acting like a scanner, it could become me. And you would not be able to tell that it wasn't me. And that was a character that wanted to, like, it literally its only purpose was to become a living thing and no longer be that orb. So he tried to become a human and figure out what it meant to be human. All these characters really reflected that in a nice way. And so I was thinking about it and I was like, humanity, it's bad. Like, that's a bad thing. Like, humanity's good. Yeah, no crap. That's not something that should have to be explained to the audience because it just makes them feel stupid. So I was like, what could all of this stuff connect to that could keep the same message? Now, Trevarron's whole thing was he hated humanity because he found them to be prejudiced and they didn't even have essentially the cannon fodder to back it up. Am I using cannon fodder correctly? Soldiers regarded merely as material to be expended in war. Yeah, so sort of like that. Like they didn't even have the guns to back up their prejudice, you know? Like, you're calling everyone else stupid, and you can't even do anything. He hated humanity because of that. That's why he was so hellbent on changing humanity. Then I thought to myself, what if it was the opposite? What if he loved humanity? And he was so heartbroken by seeing their mere fragility, their mortality, their vulnerability, and seeing how some people can be such good human beings, and they're not even given a chance in this world because of something like cancer, or something like being born without your legs. So now, Trevelyan's main motivation then went from hating humanity and wanting something better to loving humanity, and wanting to fix all the issues that they had to face on a daily basis. How do you do that? Make everybody superheroes. It's not, like, the most original, but I think that's beautiful. I think that is incredible compared to the one-dimensional Trevelyan that we had before. So, one thing that I'll give as context for this was Trevelyan's backstory originally was he lived as a normal human and was treated like dirt because he wanted to become a hero, he wanted to become a superhero, but everyone ridiculed him for it. The town that he lived in, there were no heroes, so he was scoffed at, made fun of, even, like, abused for it, treated as a monster. And he eventually died, and he realized that's what humanity is. That's disgusting. And he's like, superheroes are clearly better. You see them helping people every single day, and then humans are ungrateful little parasites. And along with all that, you would see different events in his life to where he would experience these things, you know? Like he would see wars, and he would literally travel the whole planet just, like, noticing the different massacres going on and being a part of them. But then I changed it around, and I thought of this really cool idea that Trevelyan, when he was alive, he found something very special about people. He loved people. And he did grow up in a town where there were no powers. So it was just a small community, and they were so dependent on each other that he really appreciated all the people that he lived around. Until one day he got drafted. Got drafted into a war, and what did he see? He saw all of his friends, his family. He saw them all die. Not a single person around him was alive. And he felt guilty. He felt survivor's guilt because he was like, why me? I don't deserve this. I have not earned this. Those other people did not deserve to die. Why do I get to live? This still tortured his mind, but he knew he had to keep going. And he eventually became a husband and a father. And he had his loving family. He had his wife. He had his daughter. He had his 2 sons. And guess what? He was the last remaining member in his family. The survivor's guilt had completely taken over to where he eventually took his own life. And what happened after he took his own life? He reincarnated as a dweller. It's like he could never face death. And that's all that he really wanted at the end of the day. He was nothing but just a suicidal husk of a man. Because he had nothing else to live for. Until he met Catilla, the mentor of health. And he gained a relationship with her. She became a mother figure to him. And he realized how powerful she was, that she could just cure the sick with a touch on the forehead. He gained some sort of family back with all of her children. And he met Heidi. He met Heidi and came to love her as a sister until things were going as they were. Jenwick became ill. And Trevelyan would not let this slide. Trevelyan would die himself to make sure that Jenwick lived. Now he knows that when dwellers die, they don't come back. That is the last use of your soul. And he started to feel betrayed by seeing that Heidi wanted to stop Catilla. Now, he understood that, like, she was causing harm, and he tried his best to make sure that she wasn't. But seeing that not only had Heidi betrayed her, but the people that she called friends killed Jenwick, he was broken. And he had a vendetta out for her. At least initially, but then he realized, look, all you guys want to do is bring back the planet. You just want to save people. So do I. And I want to join you. So they go, venture out to Catilla, find her, and a battle ensues, because she's so struck by grief. Eventually, the fight has to result in her death, because there's no way that the main group can bring the planet back unless they kill Gatilla. They can't get through to her. And that is the tipping point for Trevelyan. He knows that humanity's being brought back, but he sees the Jackals as the true plague on this earth. He sees them as the source of all impurity. Everything that he sees wrong with people, it's in them. And that would be a really cool thing for our main characters too. You know, some of those traits, maybe instead of their flaws being more connected to like being in touch with your humanity, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe we do see our characters start to get god complexes or start to become bitter, things like that. And so the whole story would then flip, not out of Trevelyan not caring about humanity, but the polar opposite. And so he does try to evolve humanity, because he doesn't want the simple imperfections of the world to get in the way of what could be a beautiful species. That was what Jackals was going to be. And I was like, oh no. It was a problem, because I fixed the Unfixable Story. And there was no room in the mixing pot anymore for the Unfixable Story. So I called Adam and I was like, dude, I'm panicking. I don't know what to do. I don't want to stop making Ephialtum, but like, I figured out something for Jackals that was so good. What do I do? And so I tried to find some way that I was like, you know what? Maybe in the future, maybe Jackals could just be like a one-off project that we do. You know, we could even add a disclaimer saying like, we understand that there will be many elements that are either similar or the exact same as some of our other stories. But we just thought that this would be a nice little treat to give out to the world. But then that thought in my head was going through, and I realized, like, that's kind of a good point, though. Like, there would be so many elements that are in other stories. A majority of them will most likely show up in the animation if we decide to keep them. But so many of these things are already in other stories, and unfortunately, those other stories are just stronger stories. A lot of elements that we were going to keep from Jackals show up in other things. In fact, we were going to bring back Jackals as its own little saga of comics. I thought that it would be a cool avenue to really explore some sci-fi, you know, like alien life and stuff. And then as we were developing that story with the main theme of vulnerability and mortality in mind, it completely parted from Jackals. Jackals was over here. This was our sci-fi story. The problem was, this sci-fi story was really cool. We essentially landed on something around like an alien life that would turn into like some sort of Lovecraftian cosmic body horror. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. But it wasn't Jackals. And we're making the animation, and it is perfect. But it's not Jackals. So I just had to bite the bullet and say, everything that we love about Jackals shows up in other places, and it's just executed better in those places. Making Jackals would be a waste of our time. So Jackals was officially put into the grave. Jackals is done, and it's not gonna come back. Not gonna come back as a story, necessarily. But I'll get to that later. With the conclusion of the Jackals chapter, and how all of the elements of Jackals have been put into better homes, I'm gonna get into my plan for my different stories. Specifically, my release of those different stories. The way that I want to do this is I want to actually have, like, sagas of comics. Sagas of different comics, like different collections. You know, you would have, like, multiple stories that come together to make one, like, compendium. And like, that would all be one saga. And then we would move on to a completely different collection of stories that all revolve around a different theme. And then a completely different one after that that has its own theme. The reason that I'm doing it this way was because I was starting to have that feeling of, I don't want the end of my current comic lineup to be the end of my writing. I would like to be making stories for as long as I can. And I don't want to put a limiter on myself. I don't want... It's not the name of the story anymore, but just to give context, I'll call it Hail the Red Storm. It's a better reincarnation of that story, but I don't want, essentially, Hail the Red Storm to be the last story that I ever write. I want to keep writing after that. I don't want to stop myself. I don't want to be like, ooh, that's a good idea for a story, but I'm done. That would be an awful feeling. So what I'm going to be doing instead is I'm going to be making sagas, where all of them revolve around one idea, and that idea will then sprout into possibly dozens of different stories, at least a dozen, you know, or just a bunch of stories that are all their own stories, potentially, but they all connect back to one idea. And I like that system, to where if I have like a broad concept that I would like to explore in my writing, I can reserve a saga just for that. My first one is going to be Terranax. Originally, Terranax was going to go with all of my stories relating to Demarian mythology, but I think I want Terranax to just be its own. Terranax is going to canonically be in the same universe as those stories, because that's just like my rendition of Earth. But Terranax is such a large story that I think it could really be like a nice collection on its own. And the whole story of Terranax revolves around self-acceptance. And then you get into the Demarian mythology stories, and what do those relate to? The importance of the individual. And then our cosmic body horror series that me and Adam are going to make, what is that all about? It's about mortality, fragility, and not humanity because they're aliens, but mortality is the best way to put it, and essentially the pursuit of godhood. And I think that would be a very nice way to explore different ideas and sort of keep them into their own little bubbles. So then there is still a structure to my writing. There is still not necessarily a formula. This way there is still a formation to my writing, to where things will cleanly be in their own spots, rather than just, oh, here's a story, here's another story, here's another story, here's another story. You would get all of these stories that are about one thing, but they're their own stories. Then you would get these ones, all their own stories. I think that would be a very cool way to do things. And with that, if I ever come up with new concepts that don't necessarily fit into these other ones, guess what? I can just make a new saga. I think that that's a cool way to do it. And everybody, that is the Death of Jackals. I really wanted to use this video to explain my whole creative process at the moment, because it's a bit different than when I originally talked to you guys about all of my stories, because I have the video on my animation project, and then I have the video on discussing my stories, and things are quite a bit different from how those are currently. And so I wanted to use this video to explain to you guys not only what was going on with Jackals, because I thought it would just be a fun thing to talk about, but also explaining to you guys what the future of my writing is going to look like, what the future of this channel, and what the future of Sandbox Comics is gonna be like. One thing that I do want to add that I didn't mention before, but the way that it's going to go in terms of me actually creating the stories is I'm just going to like create all of Terranax before I release it, and then I'm going to release the stories on a consistent schedule. And so while Terranax is going to be releasing, I'm going to be working on the other saga. And then while that one is releasing, I'm going to be working on the next one. So I'm going to use the time of it being officially released as my grace period for getting to work on other stories. So I'm not going to be releasing stuff for a while because I still need to start with Terranax. I haven't officially started writing it yet, but that will be my first one. So then once that is open to the public, I'll be here working on Demarian mythology. I'm extremely excited for that time whenever it does come, and I hope that you guys are too. So I think that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. This was Carter Sandvin with Sandbox Illustration. Make sure to check in the description for links to more of my content, and then like the video, comment on it, and subscribe for weekly art and comic related videos. Anyways, have fun, dudes.